Cornish Saints and Sinners by J. Henry Harris. Chapter 1. We were three. Guy Moore, who had scraped through his final and eaten his core dinner, and talked sometimes of full-bottomed wigs and woolsacks. George Milner, surnamed the Bookworm. Myself. It was an old arrangement between Guy and myself to go somewhere as soon as the long vacation commenced, and the Bookworm, a relation of Guy's, was included on account of his health. The doctor told him that if he did not take a timely rest now, he'd never read all the books in the British Museum Library, which he had set himself to do before going to Paris to read there, and then some other place, and so on. Bookworms are like that. Our mutual friend was an earnest young man and had the reader's look about the eyes, and when he went to bed, he read unknown books in his sleep. The doctor said, "Get him away, plenty of air, plenty of walking, no books." We met in Guy's chambers and talked Cornwall. But the trouble was with the Bookworm, who wanted to take a truckload of books with him. We decided on going to Penzance, and then rambling just where we would. A visit to the land of a lost language attracted the Bookworm, who at once added a few score books to be read on the spot. Guy was appointed guardian of the common purse, and empowered to make all arrangements. The books were left behind. A splendid day in August we had for our run westward. The Bookworm had a corner, and by the spirit of wonder crept over him as he looked at the blue skies and the green grass. There was a world outside of books after all. "Here's the briny. Out with your head, man, and suck it all in. It's the wine of life," shouted Guy. Up went all the blinds and down went all the windows, and everyone who could gazed upon the blue sea shoaling into green with white flaked edging on the frizzling sands. It is the custom to pay this homage to the sea for being good enough to be just where it is, between Starcross and Teignmouth. Right and left the Bookworm saw heads thrust out and faces in ecstasy, as though the whole human freight of the flying train was in rapt adoration. White handkerchiefs waved, and the pure voices of children trilled spontaneous anthems whenever the vexatious tunnels permitted them to gaze upon old England's symbol of power and freedom. It was a new experience to the Bookworm, and it surprised him that anything not printed and stitched and bound should stir so much emotion. It was nature's book in red sandstone and blue sea illuminated by the sun, on which his tired eyes rested for a few moments. He felt refreshed by the mere vision, his pulses throbbing with new sensations, and when the vision passed in the broad valley of the Tin, he asked simply, "Is there more of this?" "Plenty," said Guy promptly. According to Guy's account, we were to have just whatever we liked, when we liked, and where we liked. Seascape and moorscape, hill and vale, sailing and fishing, riding and driving, and golfing, and all that sort of thing. And then there were certain mysterious regions where we were to find tracks of the fairies and come across odds and ends of things, and people too. We were not to have any guidebooks. He insisted on that. What was the good of guidebooks to fellows on their rambles? Who cared how many yards he was from anywhere, or how many miles it was from one place to another? All that was worth remembering could be picked up on the spot, and then there wouldn't be any danger of everything running into one blurred outline of travel, just as happened to a fellow after tramping for weeks through picture galleries and curio shops and all that sort of thing. Guy said he knew a fellow who did the whole county most thoroughly, guidebook in hand. He started from Bude and did the north coast, and then he turned around and did the south coast. He scored his guidebook like a chart of navigation, and his marginal notes played leapfrog all over the show. When he got to Plymouth, he lost the precious book, and if it wasn't for railway labels and hotel bills, he wouldn't have known where he'd been. A commercial man, having totted up his accounts, seemed greatly interested in Guy's remarks and glided into the conversation. He told us he hadn't had a holiday for 30 years and never expected another in this life. He became quite confidential and gave us his views about happiness in the world to come. He never intended going on the road again for a living in the next world, he said, if there were any telephones about. He didn't like telephones when the boss was always at the other end. We ran through the apple country, and the commercial man said these orchards were simply nothing to be compared with those a few miles away, where the real Devon cider was made. He told some funny stories about cider and its makers, the way in which sweet cider was discovered, and the hand that old Nick had in the matter. "It's a short story," said he good-naturedly. "Old John Bowden had the finest orchard land in South Devon, and it appears that in the olden times the land was the property of Tavistock Abbey, and the good fathers used to come over every season to make cider and have a frolic. Sometimes the good old cider, being no respecter of persons, got into the good fathers' heads. Now you must know that the best of cider is a trifle sharp to the palate. The natives call it rough, and the fathers were in the habit of toning some rare good stuff reserved for high days and holidays in empty wine casks. One season, the wine casks falling short, the abbot of Tavistock drew up a sort of prize competition like the magazines do now, offering something tasty to the inventor of a process for making rough cider sweet without the use of wine, which I suppose worked out expensive, and, moreover, encouraged more drinking than was allowed under the Tippling Act. I must now tell you that, for a very long time, things hadn't gone on smoothly between the monks of Tavistock Abbey and old Nick, who was constantly prowling about the premises, picking up little bits of information and making the good fathers uncomfortable. Well, he chanced upon this prize competition notice on an old door covered over with cast horseshoes and vermin nailed up for good luck, and to keep his satanic majesty off the premises. However, there he was, and read the notice. A very obliging little old man turned up at the orchards one season and offered his services, and was taken in to do odd jobs about the pound house. And as he wasn't particular about his bed, he was allowed to curl himself up in one of the big empty cider casks. In truth, after the work was over for the day, the good fathers had other fish to fry and thought no more about him. But the strange workman was most busy when he was supposed to be sound asleep. Of all the fathers of the abbey, Brother John was the keenest on winning the prize for turning rough cider into sweet, and he spent hours in the pound house alone, spoiling good stuff without getting 1 foot forwarder. "Dang my old buttons," said he, after another failure. It wasn't so much the language as the temper of Brother John which attracted the notice of the little old man who slept in the cask, and he whispered something which made the good brother turn pale and tremble in his shoes. He was not above temptation, it is true, but he was a brave man for all that, and dissimulated so well that the stranger was so off his guard as to sleep in his cask and leave one of his cloven feet sticking out of the bunghole. Brother John bided his time and covered the bunghole, and then arranged for such a flow of cider into the cask upon the sleeping stranger as to settle his hash, unless it was the very old Nick himself. Old Nick it was, and when he awoke to the situation, he was so hot with passion that the cider bubbled in the cask and he disappeared, leaving the strongest of strong smell of brimstone behind. Brother John kept the secret to himself, not knowing what might come of it. But when he tasted the cider, his eyes sparkled, for it was as sweet as honey. And when sweet cider was wanted at the abbey, he used to pour it rough upon the fumes of burning sulphur, and lo and behold, it became sweet. It was old Nick who gave away the secret to Brother John, who was smart enough to learn it. A Devon man calls sweet cider matched, on account of its connection with old brimstone. Did Brother John patent the process? Asked Guy. No, he didn't, though old Nick tempted him, but Brother John was too wide awake to have his fingers burnt by patent lawyers and their agents. Is that story in print? Asked the Bookworm, preparing to make a note for future reference. I should say not. It's just one of those trifles you pick up on the road. Plenty about when old Nick is concerned. They say His Majesty didn't cross the Tamar in olden days, or if he did, then he hopped back again in double quick time. That may be, but he's a season ticket holder now, and has good lodgings, and I ought to know, for I do business all through the country, said the man of samples, stepping out of the carriage. A trifle rough on us lawyers, said Guy. Poor beggar has suffered, I suppose. Across the bridge, and we are in the land of pasties and cream, the land of a lost language, of legend and romance, where the old seems new, and the new seems old, and the breath of life everywhere. Penzance. Chapter 2. The proper thing to do when you awake at Penzance is to run down to the sea and bathe. We were told all about it in the smoking room. It is a sort of ceremony with something belonging to it. When once you've bathed in the sea, you're free of the country, like the Israelites after swimming the Jordan. Everybody asks his neighbor, "Have you bathed?" If you have, it's all right. We missed the Bookworm soon after breakfast, but Guy said we would soon find him if we drew the libraries. Guy supposed that reading was like dram drinking to a fellow who had got himself into the Bookworm's condition, and it would be just as well to let him have a dose occasionally. We decided to do Penzance on our own account. There's nothing much to do. All the streets run down to the sea, and then run up again. It is a capital arrangement and saves one asking questions. It is humiliating for a Londoner to be seen asking his way about, and takes the fine bloom off his swagger not to be able to find his way to the next street, in a town all the inhabitants of which could be put into one corner of the Crystal Palace. Guy said he'd rather walk miles than ask such a silly question. Penzance had a reputation long before any modern rivals were heard of, and was the Madeira of England before the Riviera made its debut as a professional beauty in the sunny south. Professional beauties want touching up sometimes, and Penzance has been doing a little in that way lately, though without destroying the charm which draws admirers and keeps them. It is one of those towns in which you seem to be always walking in the shadow of a long yesterday. Go into the market and buy a rib of beef, and you are brought face to face with an ancient cross whose age no man can surely tell. You buy a fish, still panting, from the creel of a wrinkled specimen of human antiquity which takes snuff, and bargains in unfamiliar words. Shops with modern frontages are filled with dark serpentine, which carries you back to geologic time, and as the photographer's the last professional beauty on the stage, is surrounded by monuments in stone, weathered and hoary before the Druids used them for mystic rites, and the names are strange. A sound of bitter wailing is in Marazion, and Market Jew brings to mind the lost 10 tribes. You learn in time that Market Jew has nothing to do with Jewry, nor Marazion with lamentation. But all this comes gradually, and there is ever the sensation of having an old and vanished past always with you. You may step from Alverton Street, Pall Mall, and Piccadilly rolled into one, with its motor cars and bikes, knickers and chiffons, into Market Jew, reminding you of antiquity and gabardines, or vice versa, just as you happen to be taking your walks abroad. Penzance has one lion, Sir Humphrey Davy. Sir Humphrey and his little lamp is a story with immortal youth, like that of Washington and his little hatchet. Sir Humphrey meets you at unexpected places and times. There was something a la Sir Humphrey on the breakfast menu. We heard about him soon after our arrival from an American tourist of independent views. He said that Sir Humphrey would not be a boss man now because he didn't know a good thing when he had it, and gave away his invention in a spirit of benevolence, which was destructive of all sound commercial principles. Then he figured out how many millions in dollars Sir Humphrey might have made if only he had patented his little lamp and run the show himself. Sir Humphrey is a sort of patron saint, and some people feel all the better for looking at his statue in marble outside the market house. He was born here, but his bones rest in peace at Geneva. They may be brought over at the centenary of his death, and canonized by the miners, whose saint he is, and God reward him for placing science at the service of humanity. We found ourselves in the Morab Gardens. The public library is there, and Guy said we might surprise the Bookworm if he came out to breathe. We didn't see him, but we saw the gardens, a little paradise with exotic blooms and fountains playing, and the air laden with perfume. We sat down, but didn't feel like talking. A delicious, do-nothing sort of feeling was over us. We didn't know then what it was, but found that it was the climate, the restful, seductive climate. A couple of fishwomen with empty baskets passed us, and they talked loud enough, but it might have been Arabic for all we knew. The letters of the alphabet seemed to be waltzing with the S's and Z's to the old women's accompaniment, and words reached us from a distance like the hum of bees. We were inclined to sleep, so moved on, but the feeling while it lasted was delicious. It may be only coincidence, but the Bookworm discovered the Morab is a Semitic word and means the place of the setting sun. The Morab Gardens face the west, and to sit in a library in a miniature Garden of Eden with an Arabic name is, in his opinion, the height of human enjoyment. The natives think a lot of the garden. Serpentine and saints are common. The former is profitable, but there was an overproduction of the latter a long time ago, and the market is still inactive. Some parishes had more than one saint, and some saints had more than one alias, to the great confusion of all saint lovers. The memory of saints, however, will last as long as the mount stands. The mount, dedicated to Saint Michael, makes one curious about the early history of the good people who came here long ago, when the sea was salt enough to float millstones. The cheapest way of coming across in those days, from the distressful country, was to sit on a millstone and wait for a fair breeze. The saints were quite ready to grind any other man's corn as soon as they landed, and the millstones were convenient for that purpose. The rights of aliens to eat up natives were articles of belief and practice. Penzance appeared on the saints' charts as the holy headland which was a mark to steer by. But St. Michael, it appears, drifted out of his course and landed at the mount where the giant lived, and thereby hangs a tale. St. Michael and the conger. There are more St. Michaels than one, but the hero of this story landed at the mount in a fog. The mount was then the marine residence of an ancient giant, well known as keeping a sharp lookout for saints through a telescope, which he stole from an unfortunate Phoenician ship laden with tin and oysters. The giant had an evil reputation, but did nothing by halves. He was asleep when St. Michael landed, and while he slept he snored, and when he snored the mount shook. The poor saint was in a terrible funk, wandering about for days reading the notices which the giant posted up, warning saints not to land, unless they wished to be cooked in oil after the manner of sardines. There was nothing to be picked up just then but seaweed, and the dry bones which the giant threw away, and there wasn't enough on the bones to support a saint after he had done with them. St. Michael had got rid of the very last drop of the best LL whiskey, and sat on the empty keg, and dreamed of his own peat fire at Ballynock, and the little shebeen where a drop was to be had for the asking. It was fear of the fierce giant about which alone kept him from singing the poem which he had composed about Home, Sweet Home. The saint was very sad, and had almost given up hope, when something in the sea attracted his attention, and he saw a great conger rise tail first and stretch itself until the tail topped the rock. Its head remained in the sea. The giant was snoring, and the mount shook. St. Michael was the gold medalist of his college, and could put two and two together with the help of his fingers. "A sign," said he, girding on his sword, and putting on his best pair of spurs. The conger was to be for him a Jacob's ladder. So he dug his spurs well into the fish's side, and climbed until he reached the top, and with one mighty stroke cut off the giant's head. There wasn't much personal estate, only the telescope, and the saint took that, but forgot to send a return to Somerset House, and pay death duties. The conger wagged his tail by way of saying he was tired and wanted to be off, so the saint slipped down quite easily, so easily that he found the earth hard when he touched bottom. Those who have eyes to see may see the mark to this day. Then the conger disappeared in the sea, but returned again, this time head first, and licked the saint's hand, who blessed it. Now the conger is very fine and large and abundant in its season, and the white scars down its sides are the marks of the saint's spurs, which tell the story of the climb. There are some who say it was a beanstalk which grew in the night for the saint to climb, and those who believe it may. The giant's blood flowed over the cliff, and a church sprang up, which St. Michael dedicated to himself. Chapter 11. And then went The Man on the Tour. The mount was not inhabited in those days. This was the beginning of the war between the saints and giants, which continued for centuries and might have lasted until now, only the saints came out on top. St. Michael crops up in various places, and for convenience I may add here what is known of him. He became the patron saint of the county after meeting with the arch enemy at Helston. There was no time to advise the newspapers and get special correspondence on the spot, but it was reported that the battle was tough and long. The enemy carried a red-hot boulder under his arm and hurled it at the saint, but he was out of practice and the ball went wide. Then the saint got in with his trusty blackthorn and basted the enemy so well that he couldn't fly away fast enough for comfort. N.B. The boulder was picked up when cool and is still on view at the Angel Hotel. St. Michael, having now done enough for mere reputation, grew ambitious and turned author, and that finished him. He wrote, "The story of my life," but the publishers returned the manuscript with compliments, and when he found he had to pay double postage on the unstamped parcels, his great heart broke. The Bookworm got back in time for dinner. He had been to all the libraries and made friends of all the curators and was now to have a good time. We met the American gentleman in the smoking room, and he gave us more opinions. He said this part of the world was a darn sight too slow for the 20th century. It was, say, 200 years behind the age. He expected that an American citizen would come across one day and just show the people what to do and how to do it. This Cornwall was a big show for the man who knew how to handle it. He took a special interest in the matter because of the Gulf Stream, and he wasn't sure whether or no this part of the old country came within the Monroe Doctrine. If it's England where the British flag waves, then ain't it America where American water runs? And if the Gulf Stream wasn't American, what was? He told us frankly that he, John B. Bellamy, Kansas City, M.O., USA, had ideas. Chapter 3. Dolly Pentreath, the fishwife of Mousel, had a reputation as wide but different as Sir Humphrey's. Her portrait is sold in Penzance, wherein Dolly is only a name now. She belonged to the adjoining parish of Paul, and so there is no statue to her in the marketplace where she sold fish, and talked the old Cornish with the real 22-carat stamp upon it. The Bookworm said Dolly's fame had done a good deal towards advertising the land of a lost language. He showed us the portrait of a determined-looking, passionate old party in short skirts and a creel on her back. We had seen already several ancient dames carrying fish quite as capable of taking care of themselves, which indicated that if the language is lost, the race survives. It's a nice walk along the shore to Mousel. We might have lingered at New Lynn, only the Bookworm wanted to get upon classic ground where old Dolly used to smoke her pipe and drink her flagon of beer with the best, and talk Cornish, the real old lingo, hot, sweet and strong, so that those who heard her once never forgot it. Dolly lived to 102 and then departed, carrying with her, in her queer old brain, the completest vocabulary of the Cornish language upon earth. This is the legend, to which is to be added that she had the reputation of being a witch. There exists an ancient corner in the village where Dolly would be at home again if she could come back, and the Bookworm walked up and down and in and out, touching the stones and rubbing shoulders against the pillars as though he expected to feel an electric shock, or received a straight tip from the old lady that he touched the spot, like Homotia. He may have passed over it, but he was happy. If he could only have found an old clay pipe that Dolly had smoked. An old man sitting on a post watched us out of the corner of his eye. He knew what we were up to, and that there was a trifle at the end of it. Guy tackled him. Dolly Pentreath? Oh yes, she died poor, and was buried in the parish churchyard of Paul. People come in shoals to see her monument and read the inscription. Had anybody got anything belonging to her? Not that he knew by. She might have had a Bible or a hymn book, but she wasn't given that way much. So many people wanted relics, and if there were ever any, they would have been sold long ago. All this was straight enough, and his blue eye looked as clear as the well of truth. We stood around him as an oracle, and he began his story. Dolly Pentreath was a fine woman with a voice that you could hear to Newlyn. She had the heart of a lion, and it was told of her that when a press gang landed in search of men for the navy, Dolly took up a hatchet and fought them back to their boats, and so cursed them in old Cornish that the crew never ventured to come again. And she was artful as well as brave, and saved a man, wanted by the law for the purpose of hanging, by hiding him in her chimney. Dolly lived in an old house overlooking the quay, the walls of which were thick, and in the chimney was a cavity in which a man could stand upright. And it was a convenient hiding place for many things. Back along, Mousel was one family, and the ties of blood spoke eloquently. So when a man rushed into Dolly's cottage, saying the officers were after him, and would hang him to the yardarm of the ship out in the bay from which he had taken French leave the week before, he did not appeal in vain. There was no time to lose, and Dolly rose to the occasion. There was no time to lose, and Dolly rose to the occasion. Up the chimney she popped the man. Then, taking an armful of dried furze, she made a fire in the wide open grate, and filled the crock with water. Into the middle of the kitchen she pulled a keeve, which she used for washing. And when the naval officer and his man burst into the kitchen, Dolly was sitting on a stool with her legs bare and her feet dangling over the keeve. This was the situation. "A man indeed," quoth Dolly, "and me washing my feet." She was only waiting for the water to het, and they might all wash their own if they liked. Search? Of course they might, and be sugared. This was old Cornish, of course. Would they like to look into the crock and see if a man was boiling there? Search they did, and found no man, but Dolly found her tongue, and let them have it. And then she found her fixed shoes, and let them fly, and then she made for the chopper, and that cleared the house. Dolly made the most noise when she heard the poor man cough in his hiding place. The aromatic smoke from the burning furze tickled his throat, and though life depended on silence, he could not keep it. Then Dolly gave tongue, and old Cornish, the genuine article, rattled amongst the rafters, like notes from brazen trumpets blown by tempests. She threw wide her door, and with bare legs and feet proclaimed to all the world the mission of the young lieutenant and his men, who now saw anger in all eyes, and made good their retreat whilst in whole skins. Then Dolly liberated the man in the chimney. In the dark night, a fishing lugger stole out of Mousel with the deserter on board, and made for Guernsey, which in those days was a sort of dumping ground for all who were unable to pay their debts at home, or were wanted for the hangman. The old man, with true blue eyes, turned a quid in his mouth, and said, with the simplicity of a child, "And that man was my mother's father." Guy was preparing to cross-examine the man of truth, but we would not have it. It was his own witness. He had found him sitting on an iron stump, and was bound to treat him as a witness of truth. Why shouldn't his own mother's father have been a deserter from the king's ship, and been saved by Dolly Pentreath? Guy agreed. But, said he, it was suspicious that that man should have been sitting on that very stump at the very right moment, and have the right story on the tip of his tongue for the right people to listen. There was too much coincidence. We let it go at that. The Bookworm had the old man with the truthful blue eyes all to himself for a time, and discovered the very room in the Kegwin Arms in which Dolly was wont to take her pint and her pipe at her ease, and the window out of which she would thrust her hard old face and shout to the fishers when they came to the landing place. The old lady was keen on her bargains, and when she had bought her Kate, she trudged into Penzance with creel on back and spoiled the Egyptians according to the rules of art. The costume of the fishwife is the same now as then: the short skirt, the turned-up sleeves, the pad for resting the creel. New Haven fishwives, but with less colour. The Bookworm tried some old Cornish which he had picked up the previous day upon the old man with the truthful blue eyes, but he shook his head mournfully. "Carenza, Wellus, Carenza," repeated the Bookworm, but the old man looked blank and did not blush at not knowing the family language. The finest chords of his heart were untouched, but he brightened up when the Bookworm sought his hand furtively and left something there. Guy said he was perpetuating testimony. The old fellow offered to go with us to Paul and show us Dolly's monument, but Guy said the place was consecrated ground, and something tragic might happen if he refreshed his memory too largely on the spot. The truthful-looking eyes were unabashed. "I don't care," said the Bookworm as we walked along the road. "I don't care. We have received from the old fellow the impressions which he received from those who saw Dolly Pentreath in life. her passionate self-will and pluck, her artfulness, her readiness of tongue and quickness in making a situation. What could be more dramatic in a cottage with only a fireplace, a wash tray, and a stool in it for accessories? I don't care how much is invention. The living impression is that Dolly would have done this under the circumstances, and so the true woman has been presented to us. I wish you joy of her, only I'm glad she doesn't cook my dinner, said Guy. Let us reckon up her virtues. She snuffed, she smoked, she took her pint, and she cussed upon small provocation. These are the 4 cardinal virtues in your heroine. I wonder how often she was before her betters for assault and battery, and using profane language in an unknown tongue. We saluted the monolith in the churchyard in memory of Dolly Pentreath, but no one can say for certain that it covers the ashes of that ancient volcano in petticoats. Guy said he could not frill unless he was sure the old lady was there, and the Bookworm ought to do all the frilling for the party. We were glad to have seen the monument, and the Bookworm said it was a sign of the bonne entente, which is to be, the Republic of Letters is superior to public prejudices and racial antipathies, he added, with a magnificent wave of the hand. We saluted the monument, including the shades of Dolly and Prince Lucian, if they happened to be around, and departed with the conviction that we had behaved very nicely towards the lost language and the Republic of Letters. Chapter 4. The American citizen was not very interested in our doings. He thought that one language was good enough for the whole earth, and that was English, improved by the United States. There were languages still spoken in America which, he guessed, wouldn't be missed if they died out, as well as the people who spoke them. He wasn't gone on lost languages or lost trades or lost anything, but was a living man and wanted people about him to show life. He had been told to take back some relics of the late King Arthur because there was money in them, and he was going to Tintagel to look round. A button, a shoelace, or lock of hair picked up on the spot would fetch something considerable. There was a market for relics on the other side. We told him we weren't keen on relics for commercial purposes and were going the other way first, so he would have it all his own way as far as we were concerned. We reached the Land's End at the lowest of low water and touched the very last bit of rock visible, so as to be able to say we touched the very last stone of dry England. We left it there for future generations to touch. Cornwall is a tract of land with 1/3 in pickle, and what can't be walked over can be sailed over. When you sail far enough, you reach the Scilly Isles, which is a sort of knuckle end to the peninsula which once was land. There isn't very much to be found out in books about the land under the sea. Of course, it is there, or water wouldn't be on top. The Cornwall under the sea is the land of romance, where some say King Arthur was born. There is no getting away from this land under the sea, for the old fairies rise from it still and spread enchantment. We were told that every little boy and girl born in the peninsula is breathed over by the fairies, and in afterlife, wherever they may be, they turn their faces in sleep towards the west and dream. From under the sea there rises morn and eve, the sound of bells, telling their own tale with infinite charm. The stranger who comes into the county must hear these sounds and thrill, and see in sunshine and shadow, on hill and in coombe, on moor and fen, the fluttering of impalpable wings. For if he hears and sees them not, he will depart the stranger he came, though he live a lifetime in the land. In Cornwall, everything is alive. The mine, the moor, the sea, the deep pools, the brooks, the groves, the sands, the caves. Everything has its moan and harmony and inspiration, and the land under the sea, which is called Lioness by the poets, was a fairy zone. And some say it sank in the night, and some say other things harder to believe. Cornwall under the sea has been there a long time. Some people, who like to be accurate above all things, say it disappeared in the year 1089 and contained 140 parish churches and God wot how many chapels and baptistries and holy wells and places. The only survivor was a Trevelyan of Basil near Launceston, who was on the back of a swimming horse. As it is not improbable that the inhabitants of Lyonesse traded with somebody elsewhere and owed them money, it is wonderful that the bad debts should have been wiped out without a murmur, and that no entry has been found in any court, or in the accounts and deeds of abbeys and priories of any interest, in the 140 parish churches and chapels and holy wells and baptistries. The Trevelyans seem to have been a larkish family, for when one of them was arrested for debt, he fetched a beehive and presented it to the bailiffs, who ran away from honey and honeycomb as fast as they could. The chimes which rise from the 140 parish churches under the sea are very beautiful to those who hear them. The square-set man who tacked himself on to us smiled when we asked him to say honestly if he had heard them. He had heard people say that they had. Some people are wonderfully quick at hearing. The fact remains that from Land's End to Scilly is blue water, and from Scilly to Sandy Hook is blue water also. There are some other facts of almost equal interest if one cares about them, but the first and foremost fact is that everyone standing for the first time upon the bluff, perpendicular cliffs at the Land's End, turns his face seawards and says, "There's nothing between me and America." Many people also think that the waves breaking on the dark rocks travel all the way from Sandy Hook without stopping for the privilege of dying on English soil. Wherever they come from, they're welcome, and so also are the winds laden with Atlantic brine, which certainly have touched no land since they left the other side. No American tourist ever comes as far west as Penzance without rushing to the Land's End to get a lungful of home air, as pure and unadulterated as it can be got in this old country. Guy was particularly interested in the Gulf Stream, which we found was another matter of unfailing interest to everybody, and at all times and seasons. Some things may be explained every hour of the day without being explained away, like the sun's light or a rainbow or a new baby's eyes. Guy wanted to have the Gulf Stream pointed out to him, just as though it were painted red on the chart or sent up clouds of steam. There wasn't much fun in looking for the Gulf Stream only, being on the spot. One was obliged to do it. We had heard such a lot about it at the hotel, and the square-set man told us that people always made a dash for the Gulf Stream when they came here. His story of the old lady bringing eggs with her to cook in the stream kept us in good temper when we found for ourselves that the water was just the same as any other sea water, as far as we could tell, and that we should not have suspected the Gulf Stream of being near if we hadn't been told. Guy said it was a fine thing to know it was somewhere about, even if we couldn't see it, because it was a sort of link between the old world and the new, and made it easy to understand why Mr. Choate was made a bencher. Guy promised to think the matter out and put it in another way if we couldn't quite understand the reference. The square-set man said he was sure there was a Gulf Stream, because foreign seaweed was picked up sometimes, and if it wasn't for the stream, early potatoes and broccoli wouldn't be early, and the flowers at Scilly would be just the same as at other places. It's a long way for a stream to come, and the square-set man told us that at one time it must have been stronger than now, for it carried away the mainland between us and Scilly. But when Guy cross-examined him on what he called a question of fact, he broke down and finished off by saying that that was what people said. Guy was willing that there should be a Gulf Stream, but he bristled when told that the peninsula was snapped off like a carrot and carried away by a stream from the Gulf of Mexico. His English pride was hurt, and he declared that he'd rather do without early potatoes and broccoli and flowers from Sicily for the rest of his life than that foreign water should ever be said to have carried away English acres, and so many of them. The invasion of England by the Gulf Stream indeed. Then where was the Navy League and the Coast Defence Committee and Mr. Balfour's great speech in the House of Commons? There was one spot that we must see and stand upon, and the square-set man was sure of himself this time. We must go and stand upon the rock where Wesley stood before composing the hymn, "Lo, on a narrow neck of land." People come from all quarters of the universe for this privilege, and some people actually go away and compose hymns and send copies to the square-set man. He did not say what he did with them, but he did not talk respectfully of an absent lady who mailed him a poem from New York and forgot the postage stamps. It was Guy's idea to stay where we were. He put it very nicely to the bookworms about communing with nature, the great unwritten book and all that sort of thing, you know. Guy was afraid that he would make a beeline for the library if we returned to Penzance, and that we should have to dig him out again. We'll keep him in the open and let the square-set man stuff him with prehistoric monuments, something solid, you know, after the Gulf Stream. Guy's mind was constantly running on the Gulf Stream. He didn't care a fig for the stream, he said, in the course of the evening, and it was welcome to travel where it would. But when it came to taking away English soil, he wouldn't hear it. No, not if all the scientists in the universe were against him. Most people carry away something, pebbles, or blooms, or bits of seaweed, or something of that sort. And there's plenty left, and all seem to carry away impressions. The guidebooks don't help the impressionists much, for everything appears different to every other person, as though the local fairies had a hand in it. The square-set man called upon us in the evening and told us stories of people whom he had conducted around the cliffs, and from monument to monument. The cliffs we found were grand, sublime, or terrible, and the rest was summed up in charming, queer, fantastic, unaccountable, odd, sweet, and the like. Specialists, of course, had their own pet phrases, but our friend was particularly struck with the fancy of the gentleman who saw in the cliffs only admirable situations for solving the great mystery. The higher the point, the more he seemed delighted. "Now, this is what I call a grand place for committing suicide," he finished off by saying, and tipped so liberally that Mr. Squareset is on the lookout for his return. An emotion once so deeply stirred will surely need to be stirred again, he hinted. When we asked Squareset to sit down and chat a bit, he said he'd be very pleased to titch pipe. And when I passed him my pouch, he said he hadn't smoked since he was a young man. "What you want to touch a pipe for, if you don't smoke, I can't imagine," said Guy. And then we found that titch pipe had nothing to do with the weed, but simply meant as an interval of rest. The bookworm made a note. Chapter 5. No one ever comes here without inquiring for wreckers. Cornish wreckers are in demand. Guy put artful questions artfully, but could get no admissions beyond that he had heard tell, that in ancient days things were done which no honest, God-fearing man should do. He was always being asked about wreckers and their doings, and a real live sample on show would be a fortune to any man. What was called wrecking now was simply picking up and carrying away little odds and ends which the sea threw up high and dry upon the beaches. And why not? Who had a better title to them? Guy said he supposed it was all right, and he remembered there was authority for saying that the king is Rex because all wrecks belong to him. If so, then wreckers are Rexers in their own right and can do no wrong. Mr. Squareset was not impressed, but he assured us that the double-dyed villain of Cornish romances innumerable was extinct now, and Mr. Carnegie's millions would not purchase a specimen for the British Museum. It was a disappointment not to find a wrecker, the bold, bad man who tied lanterns to cows' tails and sent up false lights to lure passing ships to destruction. We wanted to shake hands with one and stand him drinks and make notes of his bushy eyebrows and the color of his eyes, and then turn him inside out to discover what his secret thoughts were when hatching diabolical plans. Our faith in Cornish romances received a great shock just then, and Guy's cherished ambition to write the Chronicles of Joseph Penruddock Wrecker suffered frostbite. The world will never know more of deeds of daring do for the saving of life. Our square-set friend was full. This was another picture, a picture of black night and tempest and noble souls wrestling with death and destruction, with scarce one faint chance in their favor. He told us of a man who hung over the precipitous cliff which we had stood on that morning, shuddering as we looked down in the full light of day and the sea calm as the surface of a mirror. He told us of a man who descended that cliff by a rope when a storm was raging and the sea boiling beneath him, and how he brought back in his arms a burden, battered but still living, and how, in mid-air, the strands of the rope were chafed, so that those above trembled as they hauled, and as he spoke an inward glow spread over the man's face and revealed him. Guy seized the man's hands in both his own and wrung them, saying, "Great Scott! And you are the man who did this thing?" He told us afterwards that he couldn't help himself, and wasn't the least ashamed of being a bit soft just then. To think that this hero was the man we picked up scratching himself against a cromlech and looking for a job. We couldn't get away from the sea now, and Mr. Squareset told us how differently sailors in misfortune were treated now than formerly, how they were fed and clothed and sent from one end of the country to the other, wherever they wished to go, in fact, by rail. In his young days it was not so, and a shipwrecked mariner was compelled to tramp wherever he chose to go, either to his own home or to the next port, in the hope of getting a berth. But to tramp in fine weather, sleeping in the fields and outhouses at night and begging at decent houses by day, was very much enjoyed by the men who became heroes when they returned home. He told us the story of two ancient mariners who hailed from Cornwall and once found themselves stranded in the port of London, with little but what they stood upright in. They were young men and merry-hearted, and stood by each other in fair weather or foul, as shipmates should. They hailed from the same fishing village, and wished to be home during the feast week, which was near at hand. Failing to find a coasting vessel bound west, they started to walk, and part of their arrangement was to take it in turns to call at gentlemen's houses and ask for assistance. They preferred not to go to the same house together, but to leave one on the lookout in case of squalls. They got on well enough for some days, sleeping where they could, and telling yarns of peril and disaster, most likely, in their opinions, to melt the hearts of hearers. And the story went like this. They came to a great gentleman's house, and it was Tommy Hingston's turn to go in and Bill Barron's to watch outside. Tommy went up, as bold as brass, and asked for the gentleman, who was at home, and received him very kindly. And when he found he had come from London, he asked him for the latest news. "There's fine news, sure enough," says Tom. Then let me have it, my man. Haven't ye heard it, your honour? Haven't ye heard that London was as black as night at noonday? Most remarkable, said the gentleman. And can you tell me what caused the darkness? Sartin sure I can. A monstrous great bird flew over the town and shut out the sun with his wings. That is astonishing. And did you hear anything else? Yes, they've turned Smithfield Market into a kitchen, and all the people are to be fed upon white pot. You really mean it? I tasted it, your honour, replied Tom. And was there anything else worthy of notice? Tom scratched his head. There was something else, he added, in a sort of hardly worth talking about style. The River Thames catched on fire. Ah, said the gentleman, rising and ringing the bell, and I have catched a rank impostor, and being a magistrate will commit you forthwith to prison as a rogue and a vagabond. Billy Barron was keeping watch outside, and as his mate did not return, he grew uneasy. By and by he marched up and faced the brass knocker, and was brought before the gentleman, who was now writing out a committal order, and Tom he saw standing, bolt upright, by the side of a man who had charge of him. Billy was a soft-hearted man and burst into tears. Then the gentleman told Billy in very straight terms what he thought of his mate, a lying impostor whom he was sending to prison. Never, said Billy firmly. I'll lay my life on him. Very well. Then tell me, did you see a great bird fly over London so large as to hide the light of the sun with its wings? No, sir, replied Billy. I didn't see the bird, but I seed 4 horses dragging an egg, which people said a great bird had laid. You are a truthful man, said the gentleman. I hope so too. Then tell me, did you eat some white pot at Smithfield Market? No, I didn't, your honour, but I seed a store full of girt horn spoons. He told me something else, and I'm sure you'll answer truthfully. He told me he saw the River Thames on fire. However could he have said that? Tom, blurted out Billy reproachfully. He never see the river on fire. But what he did see was wagon and wagon loads of fish carted away with burnt fins and tails. And they would have been taken from the burning river? I do not doubt it. But mind, I didn't see it, said Billy, with the air of a martyr to the truth. The gentleman, no longer able to contain himself, sent Tom and Billy down to the kitchen and gave them the best blowout they had on the journey. And when they left, he told them, by way of compliment, that they were real Cornish diamonds and the best pair of liars he had ever known. And they were hard to beat, said Mr. Squareset.